Welcome back to another awesome video.
Today we're talking about the top 10 cables you might find useful when working with vintage stereo systems. This is kind of things that you need to have in your toolbox if you're working with this older equipment.
You just made a whole mess.
I know. Cable number 1 on the agenda is a headphone to RCA cable. Very useful. Why is it useful? Well, you can use your mobile phone and just hook into the headphone jack there if you just need to get some audio into a receiver. I use it for connecting a Bluetooth receiver to a vintage stereo system. It can be used for sending information to or from a computer sound card. There's just lots of uses for this cable. There are two different forms of this. You can get a cable or you can get a adapter plug. I like the cable because it doesn't put as much strain on the end there. And there's different levels of quality. The one on the top I think came from Radio Shack. The one on the bottom came from AliExpress. It was like $1 and it's already starting to fray. Anyway, the next cable on the agenda is a headphone splitter or Y adapter. Do you know what that's for?
A thing that split the headphones in half?
No, it's really for sharing one device with two headphones, but I use it for connecting old tape decks to PC speakers. PC speakers are great for testing line level components, and you sort of use the splitter as a coupler basically, and then you can hook your RCA jacks right in the back of the tape deck and just listen to it over the speakers. Really useful sort of hack. The third cable I'm talking about is these couplers. These are like RCA to RCA couplers. You can also just use an RCA splitter. Same kind of trick with the other splitter. Just use those two ends and ignore the other one. Those are useful for when you have like mini system components with really short wires that are built in. If you remember our video from a while back about the Blau plunked on the back, those wires are like, there's no jacks back here. They're just sort of soldered to the board. You can't disconnect them and they're very short. So if you use those couplers, you can extend them in case you want to stack it on your equipment rack a little bit higher. And of course, you can also add on to that the same trick we did before where you attach the headphone splitter and all that stuff, and you can connect this thing to the PC speaker because those just turn those cables into jacks. Next up is a headphone adapter plug. You've probably got one of these if you purchased a home stereo headset in the past 10 years or so. Some of them have those little screw-on ends. Not much to say about this. They're useful for connecting new headphones to older equipment. Next up, number 5 on the top 10 list is headphones with an inline volume control. Now these cost headphones came from Radio Shack. I have used them just for mowing lawns, but they still sound great.
Yeah, and that's why they're sweaty.
Don't say that. That's gross. All right. Anyway, the reason for getting headphones with a volume control is you'll notice a lot of tape decks have a headphone jack, but they don't have a volume control. So you plug in headphones into it, and you don't have any control over the volume, and so it's blowing your eardrums out. With this, any tape deck you use has a volume control, which is nice. To borrow a phrase from Billy Joel, don't waste your money on a new set of speakers if you're just looking for something to test with while you're repairing an old receiver. These aren't powered, but they're small enough. They fit in a drawer. You don't have to worry about them being blown up or disconnecting your good speakers. These, plus the powered speakers earlier, are just great for testing components and receivers. And with speakers, of course, you need to have wire. Now, with binding posts or clips or most connectors on receivers, you just use wire. But I made this box to connect to more low-end type equipment. It has RCA jacks and phone plugs. So the RCA jacks will work with lower-end equipment, and the phone plugs with some equipment and tape recorders from the 60s. But I wouldn't leave this up permanently. It's just sort of for temporary testing purposes. And so an RCA cable is almost too obvious to include on this top 10 list because you've just got to have it. But what is not obvious is the length. Having a 20-foot long cable is going to be very useful when the equipment you want to hook up to is far away from the workbench.
Is RCA still around?
Yeah, I guess that's where the name RCA Cable came from. I don't know, Radio Corporation of America? Yeah. Anyway, and then these last two are not maybe as common, but, you know, a DIN cable. DIN is a sort of, yeah, not like your DIN of your house. No, DIN is just a different standard than RCA. Instead of having a cable for input and output, it crams them all into this one connector. Now, some decks, like the TIAC we show here, have the option for both RCA and DIN, but we also did a video with a Bang & Olufsen VioCord 6000 that only had DIN, so we used this cable to get sound out of it. It had also a level switch because DIN input levels are different than line input levels. Our final little connector is a cassette adapter. This one was given to me because it was shorted out. I just put a new connector on the end of it. And what it does is let you pipe an external source in. And you may remember our video about the boombox. It didn't have an auxiliary input. We were able to hook it up. Anyway, we hope you found this pretty useful, just talking about the different types of cables that you might need when working with vintage stereo. But that's about it for today.
We'll see you next time for another awesome video.
Bye.